Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I, Ken, read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. Our next letter comes from Penelope. Penelope writes, "Hi Ken, thank you so much for all your content. It's been incredibly helpful as I've just experienced pretty much the worst what the fuck situation in probably my whole entire life." You're very welcome, Penelope. My story begins way back in 2001. Both Rob and I were in the Navy together. He was enlisted and I was an officer, so we couldn't fraternize, but there was always a little spark and mutual respect for one another. Now, fast forward on to 2015-ish, we reconnected via social media. He lives in Washington, D.C., and I live in San Diego, California, opposite sides of the US. And now, over the course of the years to follow, we called each other, discovering that we both had a lot in common. Our conversations were exciting, charismatic, interesting, and fun. Both of us had been married with children, and we had a lot of similar interests in spirituality and in life in general. Fast forward to January 2023, I hadn't heard from him in a couple of years, so I called him and he charismatically answered and said he was happy to hear from me. He told me that he got married a second time to a volatile, unfaithful woman and ended up getting a divorce in 2020. He said he was doing a lot of self-healing work, therapy, and was doing very well. Our conversation was just like old times, fun and exciting, but this time it was deeper. He was verbally affectionate, and we talked about how much of a bummer it was that we were geographically separated. After a few more phone chats, he invited me to meet him in Santa Barbara, California. He was going to be there for a work trip. Now, Santa Barbara is close to San Diego, so I excitedly said yes. And this is where the whirlwind began. In Santa Barbara, there was an instant connection. The dude swept me off my feet. He was incredibly romantic, serenading, singing to me with his guitar, cooking extravagant food at the Airbnb we shared, whining and dining me, captivating conversation, etc. He declared that he never felt more connected to another woman, that this was destiny, and that he wanted to see more of me. I was swept away. The vacation was whimsical. The friendship turned into a major attraction for both of us. We didn't sleep together, but the attraction was fierce. So, just going to take a pause here to say it's interesting because I feel like for Penelope, things are escalating quite quickly. Isn't it interesting? You've known this guy since when was it? 2001? Yeah, 2001. So this is a 20-year relationship of sorts, if you will. And by relationship, I don't literally mean romantic, but I mean there was obviously the fertile soil for some romantic stuff that's been around for quite some time. And in 2023, it seems like things have finally started to sizzle. The kindling of love has started to obviously burn, and it sounds like this is turning into a bit of a wildfire. But I also want to say it's really both beautiful to read how this has been such an amazing sort of sounding experience at this particular point in time, because I could imagine that knowing this guy, knowing Rob across this entire experience, right? It might have felt like fate, that you'd probably respectively been in and out of relationships. He'd just gone through divorce with a volatile person. And at this particular point in time, right, he's obviously going through, some big changes, as are you. He's in therapy, and you come together, and I could imagine it would have felt like the stars have aligned. I'm pretty confident if you saw an astrologer, they would probably confirm the same. And I say that not in jest, because if you actually go to a lot of astrologers when they do natal chart readings for people like yourself and also people like Rob, they often can reveal, oh, yep, there's lots of fertile stuff here between the two of you because you share a lot of stuff in common. So something tells me there probably was a lot of stuff here that obviously has been the basis for this to develop in 2023. But second thing I wanted to say, this is already feeling like it's escalated very quickly in January of 2023. And I feel as though we are getting into potential love bomby sort of territory, because him saying things like, it must be destiny. On one hand, I suppose the astrologers would agree, but on the other hand, too, I'm like, when I hear that, I'm like, whoa, like, settle down there, Rob. We've only just started really, getting to know each other after a while. Although I suppose after 20 plus years of somewhat knowing each other, you might have felt like you'd already had the foundation of something. So you may have felt like, oh, well, there's no real love bombing here. It just feels like we've finally escalated now in 2023. But still, it does seem like there's a lot of stuff going on. The whining, the dining, the deep conversations and stuff. It's just like, this sounds like it's escalating quite quickly, even though you'd obviously not had an experience where you'd, shared a lot of intimate time prior to this point. It'll almost be like, you'd been acquaintances and then over time you got together and then things escalated very quickly from there. The meaning that, you've obviously been in each other's periphery where you've, contacted one another, and circumstances just didn't allow for you both to sort of really connect up until this point. So now that you're both all going all in, I'm curious to find out when the withdrawal phase starts. So let's continue. Penelope writes, after we returned to our homes, he called and texted me every day, saying things like he is falling in love with, oh, okay. Here we go. Saying he's falling in love with me and that he could see me as his wife. We'd been friends for a long time. So while I knew things were escalating fast, I felt like we had a solid friendship foundation. So I trusted and believed what he said. Yeah, well, that's consistent with what I was saying as well, too. So I can understand it doesn't feel like love bombing, but it does. I think the thing for me is it's escalated so quickly from friendship to lovers in this span of time. I'm like, whoa, like, it's gone, it's moving very fast now, is what I'm feeling, despite that foundation. When they say to you, you should always, marry your friend, get to know them before you end up being with them. There is sense to that, but it still won't matter if you're with someone who's a severe avoidant, because when you cross that threshold of being lovers and things are getting more close and intimate, that foundation of friendship and whatever you had there is going to go out the window. So that advice is pretty backwards for these kind of experiences, which is annoying because, we're all, I think a lot of us are looking out here for ways to make sure we don't experience this sort of stuff again and again and again and again. But I could imagine that this has been a very, difficult experience because, you're obviously trying to, you're creating something here where there's been that friendship. And I can see that, I mean, I already know because you've written this to me, that this is obviously, the friendship obviously wasn't enough to save this. Or maybe it will, who knows? I haven't reached the end yet, so let's keep going. We planned a visit to Sedona, Arizona together. That trip was absolutely breathtaking. More serenading, him declaring his love, planning our future together, stargazing, etc. And over the course of the next 6 months, I received daily FaceTime phone calls, daily FaceTimes and phone calls. We vacationed or visited each other's homes at least twice a month. He brought property in both his and my name. He wrote and composed 3 songs about me and his love for me. He painted 2 portraits of me and hung them proudly in his living room. We decided that we would do the long distance relationship and started making plans for the future. We opened a joint bank account to save for the future. He proposed to me, and when I said yes, he was hyperfixated and turned on by calling me his wife, or preferred to call me by his last name. He was super charming and charismatic with my friends and declared to them that he was going to make me his wife. He pushed to make a relationship with my 15-year-old daughter. He was super charming with my mum and sister. He was very public about us on social media. He promised to help me remodel my home so I could have more room for when he came to live with me. I started the construction believing that he was committed. He declared that he would help me send my kids to college, and there were unexpected gifts at times, all addressed to me. And he always addressed them with his last name attached to my first name. So it felt very romantic, as if the intention for marriage was still there. He told me that he never felt so loved and connected to someone, that we were soulmates. He made me feel like the most beautiful and cherished woman on the planet. I felt so safe and loved by him. I trusted him and believed him. The lovemaking was deeply intimate and loving and exciting. Okay, I want to take a moment here to say, whilst this is a lot, beautiful, right? Like, what beautiful gestures. And I know there's going to be people out there being like, yeah, it's fake. Yeah, well, I don't think you can fake some of this stuff. Like, I mean, there's a lot of investment being put in by Rob into this relationship with Penelope. Like, I genuinely feel as though, as I'm reading this, I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of affection being thrown in here. A lot of resources too, right? Lots of money, lots of emotion, lots of effort. To me, this doesn't feel like there's any malice attached to this. It genuinely feels like he's super excited to be dating you, Penelope. Like it really does sound like he's like fully on board with this and super keen. So I do want to say that I am kind of a little envious of the amount of like attention and love you're getting, because this is the sort of stuff that we would read in romance novels and just, see on rom-coms and stuff like this, right? It's nice, hot, sizzling, and steamy. It's beautiful. But something tells me we're about to get to phase 2, the withdrawal phase, very soon, because I can't imagine this love bomb phase is going to remain at quite the same intensity for much longer. From the beginning, Rob shared with me that he experienced severe trauma during his childhood. He was open about it, and I was supportive. He shared that he'd gone through intense therapy. He shared that this had affected his previous relationships and that the women he chose were not emotionally supportive. He shared that he felt safe with me, like how a mother makes their child feel safe and loving. And oh my God, I know in retrospect that sounds so cringe. Don't worry, I feel the same way about my experiences too. I can be very maternal with guys I date, so I get it. It's a bit frustrating when you look back on it in hindsight and go, fuck, totally trauma bonded there. Penelope continues. He also used marijuana daily to treat his PTSD. And he experimented with therapeutic psychedelics. He was functional and attentive whenever I was around him, so I felt he had it under control. Periodically, he would reference something awful that happened to him in his childhood, and he would withdraw and get a little dark, but after a little space, he came back happy and loving. Okay, I want to take a moment here to say I am not someone who has the greatest knowledge of psychedelics or use of like medicinal drugs to support people, right? Like legal or otherwise. And I know in some states of America and in parts around the globe, it's legal, and you can obviously do this with, CBD oils. You can use weed. You can use, I know in some therapeutic practices, they allow people to use, what is it called again? I think it's ecstasy or something similar to that to try and help people to break down their walls. I can't remember the name of the drug, and I don't think it's ecstasy. It's something similar to that. Doesn't matter. What I wanted to say here, though, was if you're a recreational drug user, here's my thoughts. It's at this point where I worry if we're in addiction territory. Meaning, how are the drugs being used? Meaning, is this part of your regulation, and or is this a way of trying to suppress your emotions because you can't handle the stuff that's happened? Now, he's obviously been in the Navy with you, right? We know he's also suffered a lot of trauma. So he's using marijuana daily to treat his PTSD. But what else is going on there as well too? Because we know that similar to marijuana use, alcohol is often used as a way of uh, treating PTSD. in a way of trying to avoid a lot of those suppressed emotions as well too. And that's why many, veterans who are discharged from the Navy, the Army, often end up having lifelong issues and comorbidities because of that untreated PTSD and the coping mechanisms they have to try and manage it. So here's where I'd say, listen, to anyone listening to this, I'm all for people who want to, use drugs recreationally. More power to you. You do what you want to do. But there needs to be significant context around this, being that without judgment, it's more just a case of like, how is this relationship with drugs affecting your capacity to be in a relationship? What are you using them for? For instance, if you're someone who, with a different coping mechanism, are a big video gamer, are you doing that to avoid intimate moments? Are you someone who uses marathon running, exercise, and bodybuilding to avoid looking at yourself, and also some of the reasons as to why you do that? So I want to make it clear that I don't judge him for his marijuana use. I'm worried that this is a sign of potential concerns to come. Anyways, Penelope continues. Around the 5-month time frame, we'd only had two major arguments, and he shared that these arguments felt physically and emotionally debilitating for him, leaving him highly distressed. But after we talked and worked it out, we identified each other's triggers and promised to be mindful in the future. I personally felt we were stronger and more aligned afterwards. However, I do remember him later saying randomly and casually that if we got into daily arguments, then he would be done. I remember thinking that this was so odd because we didn't get into daily arguments. We only had two disagreements that were resolved. I also noted that he was becoming more vague about the summer plans we made when he was previously very decisive about our plans together. Now, despite all of this, we're making arrangements for our future, plans of getting married, and planning the actual logistics of building a life together. He seemed very excited about this. I felt we were moving out of the honeymoon phase and into that forming a solid partnership alliance phase. The intimacy felt deeper too. Well, you may have felt like you were moving into that phase, but something tells me, Penelope, you were also moving into phase two of withdrawal. Well, you weren't, but sounds like Rob was, because the fact that he's becoming a bit more vague about plans suggests to me a transition is happening. We took our last trip 7 months into our relationship, and we decided to take a road trip and camp at various locations on the east coast of the USA. We were driving into conservative states, which meant he couldn't bring marijuana because it's illegal. Oh dear, now I see where this is potentially going. We managed to make it the first night, but the second night we had no sleep and woke up with no coffee and had little access to food and were slightly hungover and dehydrated. He was not able to smoke weed, and we were grumpy and had an argument. As we were driving to our next location, I was silent because I needed the time to process my feelings. I also didn't want to say something I didn't mean because I was so tired and grumpy. We drove in silence for 3 hours, and after about 3 hours of driving, we stopped so I could use the bathroom. When I came back, he said, "What are we doing?" I spent the last 3 hours calcifying my heart. I will not be given the silent treatment. This is a pattern with you. I can't do this. When I protested, saying, "Wait, are you breaking up with me? I don't even know where I am," he nodded and said he would be quote unquote kind and drop me off at the nearest airport. He then proceeded to drive me to a small random airport in North Carolina. During the drive, I didn't say anything because he was very decisive about breaking up with me and I wasn't going to beg him to keep me. When I got out, he got my bag from the back of the van. I looked at him thinking he would ask to talk or take back what he said. And I was shocked because he didn't seem to want to walk this back. I was furious and devastated. He didn't say anything, but he was sobbing. I gave him a hug and said goodbye. And I walked towards the airport, turned around and watched him drive away. It wasn't easy to book a flight home since the airport was small, and I ended up having to stay the night in North Carolina. We enabled tracking for each other, so I watched as he made his way through 3 states. He texted me 4 hours later saying that the pain and hurt between us is unbearable and that he hopes we can talk in a few days. He texted that he missed his best friend, etc., and I texted him back saying I was devastated and furious and needed to process everything that happened before I could talk to him. Good on you. I'm really sorry that you've gone through this, Penelope, because that's fucked. It took a few days to process, but after 3 days, I was ready to talk with him, and I felt like my heart had been ripped out of my body. Yeah, I bet it did. Can I actually take a moment here to say, what awful behavior? Like, that's fucked on so many levels. That is so not okay to do that to someone. You're in a car on a holiday, and your partner literally turns to you and says, after everything's been, seemingly great, yeah, we're done. And proceeds to drive you to an airport. And when you, being a woman, where, if the man's at the driver's seat, you're at the mercy too of not having a lot of security and safety in that environment, right? And I think what's dreadful about this too is the fact that you mentioned before how it's not like you'd had any major arguments. And it seems like with the absence of, weed and also his inability to suppress his emotions, that's when things hit the fan for him and he went straight to the detached phase, the third phase of this. And he started to just find ways to get rid of you. And he chose to do it in a very abusive way. You know, it's so not okay to be dealing with this in a car. And then, as you can see, he's obviously crying as he's doing this because it doesn't sound like he totally agrees with this decision making either. But I just feel like this is bullshit. It's so cruel. It's so unfair. You guys have got a joint fucking bank account. He's been telling you how you're his wife. He's got, his last name connected to yours on various objects and gifts. And I just sort of think, this is bullshit. You don't just fucking retract like this. And I can imagine that, like, I want to just say, I think this breakup was inevitable in that the signs were starting to show around the time when he was being vague with future plans. But that doesn't make any excuse for his behavior because I just think this is so fucking bad. I'm really sorry that you've gone through this, Penelope, because this is just so, so bad. Anyways, let's continue. During our conversation that we had a few days later, he was distant but apologetic. He had a hard time owning up to the fact that he dumped me at a random airport. He said that our relationship made him realize that he still had a lot of self-work to do and that he needed time to heal. Bull fucking shit. I mean, on one hand, yeah, that's true. You do need a lot of work on yourself, Rob, but this is, he won't look for that work. Like, I know many avoidants who use that excuse as a nice, convenient way to justify their behavior. And I'm going to say I'm leaning dismissive avoidant with this guy. He's not giving me fearful avoidant vibes. I really think this is dismissive avoidant territory. He acknowledged the incredible connection we had, but said he couldn't feel it anymore. Oh my fucking God, you moron. Like, you're just suppressing your emotions. That his actions were a trauma response and that he didn't want to keep hurting people he cared about. Well, then why the fuck were you in this relationship in the first place? Go to therapy, and I bet he won't work on this in therapy. During our conversation, he said it was beginning to feel like a conditional relationship and he didn't feel safe. Oh my God. And as time passed, I began to receive gushingly apologetic texts. He said he felt shame and that he failed us. He vowed to fight for the relationship and that it wasn't over. No, man, it is over. I know this sounds very FA territory about him apologizing and vowing to fight for the relationship, but I still say DA. I feel like this man is in dismissive avoidant territory, and I feel like he's an idiot. I know it sounds harsh. I know he's worthy of love. I know he's got some great parts to him. I'm accepting of that. But the way he's behaving right now is so fucked up and so not okay. And him saying on one hand, it felt like a conditional relationship. And then he's consumed by shame and feeling like he failed you. Yeah, he did. He did fail you. And I just think he needs to sit with that shame, go to a therapist, and work on a lot of this stuff because it's going to take him a while to heal from this. And I was struggling to determine if being ditched at an airport was a boundary for me. For me, that's not just a boundary violation, Penelope. That is like, we are never, ever, ever going to see each other again because that is just so fucking disrespectful. But that's me, doesn't have to be you. I felt so much pain, but also knew I would have a hard time trusting him again, I bet. I think he sensed this because no more than 2 weeks later, he began coldly asking me to send gifts back. He had an attorney draft paperwork for me to sign to remove me from the deed of the property he bought for us. After fulfilling all of his requests, I went no contact. 2 months later, I learned that he got engaged to another woman, an old friend, who he mentioned a few times while we were together. She helped house sit, water plants, or dog sit while he was traveling with me. Later, I found out she was his girlfriend between his second wife and me. Wow. Wow. Lies and obfuscation. Terrible. It's been 6 months of no contact, and it has been the most painful experience of my life. I've never felt so heartbroken. It physically hurts at times. I bet it does. I can't help but feel so foolish for believing him and falling for him. It felt very real for me. Was it real for him? Did this dude really love me? I think is what's being said here. Two, how could he get engaged to another lady 2 months after breaking off our engagement? Very easily. I'll answer that in a minute. Finally, my tendency when in conflict is to withdraw, process the issue, and then come back and talk it out. Sometimes this takes a few hours. Sometimes it takes a few days. It doesn't feel like silent treatment because my intent isn't to punish, is this avoidant behavior. Thank you, Ken, for considering my letter. Any insight would be much appreciated. Oh, Jesus. I want to say again, you've been through hell. Penelope, I'm so sorry. This is such fucked up behavior that you've endured. You didn't deserve this. But again, it's complicated, right? Because I do believe answering your first question, yeah, it was absolutely real for him. I think the fact that he, recognized what he'd done and didn't like the fact that he'd behaved in a bad way, it didn't make him feel good. And I suspect, as a way of punishing you, I am using that word, you know, him getting with this new person, taking all the gifts back, removing you from the estate, makes me think, oh, this is his way of trying to avoid feeling shame. And he's obviously trying to be like a cold robot. He's shut down and he's trying to move forward. And this nicely ties into the second part, which is, well, how could he get engaged to another lady 2 months after breaking off our engagement? Well, we know that he already knew this person beforehand, but avoidance can sometimes get engaged with complete strangers too. So how does he do that? Quite simple. We know that he can love bomb very easily, right? And we also know that he has unprocessed emotions off the back of his time with you. So he's likely taken all that intensity that he's very good at, plus also the emotional stuff from your relationship, and now he's putting it onto her. And I bet you he'll probably be doing similar stuff with her. Let's get property together. I'll share my name. You can have my last name. I'll get you gifts. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes on trips like the one you've done already, just to try and re-emulate the experience. He'll convince himself that he's moved on, put all this effort into acting like everything's okay. But you've got to understand that when an avoidant puts all this effort, all this time and energy to moving forward from you by being with a new person, they're trying to convince themselves that they're over you, that you never mattered, when in fact they're still fucking obsessed with you. They miss the shit out of you, but they're trying to act like they've moved on and that they're fine and everything's okay. And lastly, your question to me was, is my tendency to withdraw and process the issue an act of avoidance? No, not at all. I will speak for myself and say conflict can often cause a dysregulated nervous system. And I find, like I've said on record, when I'm dysregulated, I lose about a good 100 IQ points and I can't see things objectively. So sometimes I too need a few hours or days just to like calm the hell down. And then when I return to it, it's like, all right, let's continue this. To me, I read that as very secure behavior because you're saying, all right, I'm feeling a bit dysregulated. I will get back to you and we'll work, we'll continue working on this. And that's not the silent treatment. The silent treatment is when you're intending to hurt another person by making them grovel and apologize for behavior that may not even be their responsibility because you've learned that behavior from someone else and you want to make them feel like the connection between the two of you is threatened. That's different. Now, I don't know how it played out in your relationship because I wasn't a fly on the wall, but what you've shared with me does not feel like it's in the realm of avoidant behavior. I think if you're very disclaimed about it, being like, I need a few days to process this and then I'll get back to you. I've done that before. I don't think it's avoidant behavior because you're not being vague about it. You're not being passive aggressive and silent, trying to get, an evoke and a response from the other person. But yeah, oh my God, Rob, like just he really, did some abusive shit to you. And the fact that he thought it would be okay for him to just circle back after doing this to you, the audacity. What absolute bullshit behavior. I'm trying to refrain from calling him an asshole because I know he's more than just an asshole. I know there was lots of love there too at one point from this guy. Probably still is, but throwing it into the new girl. Well, actually, it's the old girl, right? It's his ex from a while ago. But still, just terrible, terrible fucking behavior you've enjoyed, Penelope. In any case, thank you for sharing this letter. Just as we're rounding out, just as a reminder that next Friday is when the submissions for future Can Read letters will be opened again for December. And they are 125 Australian dollars per submission. You can share your letter there with me, and it can be anywhere between 500 to 2,000 words. Outside of that, if you like this episode, I'd love it if you can please give us a review on Spotify. It really helps us out. And I look forward to seeing you guys and reading out the next letter.